This will be our last instructional video about the Bill of Rights. So you've powered through. This is good stuff. And we're going to be covering amendments 4 through 10 in this video. So that's the most amendments that we've covered in any video about the Bill of Rights for this class. However, amendments 4 through 8 are about like the same thing. So they'll kind of fly through pretty quickly. And then 9 and 10 are also super duper fast. So it takes a little bit of explaining, and then we'll kind of power through it, okay? So our learning target is to explain due process and how the 4th through 8th amendments protect the rights of the accused. And then a little bit about the 9th and 10th amendments too. So let's dive in. Here's due process. Due process refers to when you are accused of a crime, there is a process that is due to you. You get to go through this process instead of just being thrown in jail to rot there for the rest of your life. Okay? So it is important to provide these rights. When people are accused of a crime, they still have rights, and they have what are called their due process rights. They are allowed to go through this process, and they need to be found guilty of the crime that they've accused of before they spend time in prison, right? So we're going to focus on these due process rights, which are the rights of the accused, those who have been accused of crimes. Now, for amendments 4 through 8, I hope you never need these amendments, right? I think about other amendments like the First Amendment. I am super glad we have the First Amendment because I use it every day, right? The freedom of religion and freedom of expression, that is something I use every single day. And technically, I guess I also use the Third Amendment every day because every night I am not quartering any soldiers in my home. But some of these amendments are amendments that I hope you never need. But gosh, I'm glad we have them in case you do. And so it's important to know, what are your rights, just in case you get caught up in the wrong place at the wrong time and you're in a bad situation. You should know what your rights are. Okay, so here we go. Our due process rights are founded on this idea that we are innocent until proven guilty. There are some countries where it's the opposite. There are places around the world where they assume that you are guilty, and they leave it up to you to prove that you didn't commit a crime. You know what's really hard to do? It's really hard to prove that you didn't do a crime while you're in jail. You can't go around and collect evidence that you didn't do it because you're in jail. So our due process rights go under this idea that you are innocent until the government proves that you are guilty. And that's the foundation of our due process rights. And the government has to prove that you're guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. So they can't just say, no, we're really pretty sure you did it. They have to prove absolutely that the suspect or that the person who's accused, in fact, did that crime. And if there's a sliver there that says, well, there's a chance they didn't, then they need to release them, right? It is the government's job to prove that a suspect is guilty. A suspect does not need to prove their own innocence. So this is important to remember, that if you are ever caught up in a bad situation, it's the government's job to prove that you did the crime. You can just sit there and be like, let's see you find the evidence. Prove it, right? You need to do that. It is not up to a suspect or the accused to prove their own innocence. It is the government's job to find evidence that proves that you're guilty of a crime. And so our Fourth Amendment is the first of those due process amendments that helps protect us from the government. Isn't this kind of interesting that our government actually created amendments to the Constitution so that the people would be protected from the government, right? Our own government came up with ways to protect us from our own government, right? Like, that's kind of cool when you think about it, that our government puts us first, so much that they created these amendments to the Constitution to say, these are the ways that people are protected from the government, right? Our own government comes up with its own ways of restricting itself, of protecting us from it. Kind of cool when you think about it. So the Fourth Amendment says that we have security from unreasonable searches and seizures. This is where we get our right to privacy from. And again, nowhere in the Constitution does it actually say you have a right to privacy. So you can't use that argument. You can't say the Constitution says I have a right to privacy. No, it does not. However, the Supreme Court has interpreted the Fourth Amendment to mean that you have a right to privacy. What you have is security from unreasonable searches and seizures. And that word seizure there, sometimes it can be confusing for people. We're not referring to a medical episode where someone shakes violently. We're talking about when the government seizes your property or seizes your belongings, when the government takes things from your house as evidence. They can't do that unreasonably, right? So we'll talk about what that actually means. They need to have a warrant. Okay, in order to search your home or search your car or check your yard or your property for evidence, they have to have a warrant. And they get that warrant by asking a judge for it. And in order for a judge to grant them a warrant, they need to have probable cause. Probable cause means a really good reason to look, right? So police cannot come knocking on your door saying, let us in. They have to have a warrant for you to let them in your house. Now, sometimes things can go bad in how you respond and behave if the police do show up, right? One, you can just stand there and politely say, I need to see a warrant. And if you don't have a warrant, then you're going to have to come back with one, right? But if you start like throwing a hissy fit and getting violent or yelling at them, you're giving them a reason to think there's something suspicious going on. You're giving them probable cause. So they may very well come back with a warrant this time because they could tell the judge, yeah, a person went crazy just when we knocked on their door. So they're hiding something, I know. So it's important that you know your rights, but that you exercise those rights appropriately, right? So you are protected from searches and seizures. Police need to have a warrant in order to search your home or your property. But your behavior in that moment could give them other probable cause that they might need to pursue things, right? Now, a warrant is not required in emergencies. So can you imagine if the police are like chasing a robbery suspect and they're like running down the street and then that suspect runs into a house? The police don't have to knock on the door and say, excuse me, can you please let me in? Because I was pursuing this suspect. And no. If the crime is in progress, right, that is an emergency that is happening right there and then. And police do not need to obtain a warrant in order to go into a house to pursue a suspect that they are chasing in that crime in that moment. But they do need probable cause, right? They can't just start randomly chasing some person because they think it would be fun, right? They need to have a good reason for doing what they're doing. So a warrant is not needed in emergencies, but they do need to have a really good reason. They do need to have probable cause, right? Now, there's something called the exclusionary rule. And what the exclusionary rule means is that if the police or law enforcement finds evidence illegally, then that evidence cannot be used in court. They're not allowed to use that evidence because they didn't follow the Fourth Amendment. If they got evidence without a warrant, then that evidence can be excused and it's like it doesn't even exist. And it could be the thing that proves that the person did the crime. But if they didn't obtain that evidence legally, then they can't use it and it has to be dismissed. So this is why it's really important that our police follow the laws, but also that you know your rights to make sure that the police follow their laws. Now, my father-in-law is a defense attorney. And that's what he does. He's actually a public defender. So his job in the courtroom is to defend people who are accused of crimes. And whenever I share that with people, oftentimes they go, wait, you mean he like defends bad guys? Yeah, but he doesn't ask them if they're bad or not, right? He just says, hey, I am here to make sure that the police and the judge and the other lawyers are all following the law. And if they're presenting evidence illegally, I will speak up and tell them they can't share that evidence, right? That's his job. He never asks his clients, so did you do it? Did you commit the crime? Tell me. He doesn't ever ask that. He's just there to make sure that everybody follows the law and follows due process. I talk to him all the time about, hey, did you win your case? And he's like, no, I lost. I'm like, good. Hopefully a bad guy went to jail because he was guilty. And he's like, yeah, probably, right? So he's one of those lawyers that yeah, he is defending someone who is accused, but he doesn't ever ask, so did you do it? He's there to make sure that due process is being followed, right? And again, it's kind of interesting because it is the government that is paying him to make sure that the government follows the rules, right? That's his job, is to make sure that everybody else in the courtroom is following the law, right? So that's the exclusionary rule to the Fourth Amendment. If any evidence is found illegally, then it can't be used in court. Okay, so that's the Fourth Amendment for security from unreasonable searches and seizures. Now, here's the Fifth through Eighth Amendments. It's going to feel like a lot, but it's all like courtroom stuff. So if you are interested in some of those like CSI shows or NCIS or Law and Order, like this is the slide for you. Like this is all of that courtroom stuff. The Fifth Amendment says that you are allowed to be indicted by a grand jury. Indicted is a fancy way of saying be found guilty. You're like, wait a second, how is that good? Well, what matters here is that it's a jury that decides if you're guilty or not. And a jury is literally a group of people. So instead of leaving it up to just one person, instead of just letting one judge decide, it ends up being a jury of your peers, usually 12 people. And all 12 of those people have to agree that you are guilty or not guilty. If there's just one person that says, I don't think they did it, I'm saying not guilty, then they can't send that person to jail. Even if the 11 other jurors say, no, we think he's guilty. If there's just one that says, I'm not so sure, then they have to keep on deliberating until all of them agree. It has to be unanimous. So the Fifth Amendment basically helps people stay out of prison, right? If there's any shadow of a doubt that they didn't commit the crime. So again, this puts pressure on the government to make sure that they find evidence that clearly proves that someone did it. That way the jury, it's like a no-brainer, and they're like, yeah, this guy definitely did it. So you have a right to indictment by a grand jury. No double jeopardy. This one's kind of interesting. Has nothing to do with the game show. This means that you can't be accused of the same crime twice. So let's say that you are accused, or let's just use me. Let's talk about me here. Let's say I am accused of stealing a loaf of bread. Okay, so I go to court, they have their evidence against me, and they end up proving, or no, they end up unable to prove that I stole the bread. So I get to go home and I'm innocent, right? Well, then they find evidence later. They found more evidence later that totally proves that I did steal that loaf of bread. They can't send me back to the courtroom. Okay, they can't accuse me of that exact same crime twice. So even though they found evidence that I totally did steal the bread, they can't put me back on trial because they already put me through trial. They already said I was not guilty, and I get to go home and eat my bread, right? Now, here's what they're going to do after that, though. Now they're going to watch me. Every time I go to the bakery, they're going to be like, here comes that bread guy again. Yep. So now we're going to watch me really closely to make sure I don't steal another loaf. Okay. And sometimes people ask, well, so wait, so that means you can steal loaves of bread for the rest of your life and you won't ever go to jail for it? No, 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 no. If I stole another loaf of bread, that would be a different loaf of bread. It'd be a different crime, right? So you can't be accused of the same crime twice. So the Fifth Amendment protects us from double jeopardy. And it's also where we get that expression, I plead the fifth, meaning you don't have to be a witness against yourself. You do not have to take the witness stand. It is the government's job to prove that you did it. You don't have to prove that you did not do it. Now, sometimes it might benefit you to take the stance. You can say, okay, I didn't do it. Here's why, A, B, C. And then everyone's like, oh, yeah, clearly you did not do it. So sometimes it does work out that maybe you want to take the witness stand, but you don't have to. And so it's up to the government. It's up to law enforcement to find evidence to prove that you did it. And you don't have to bear witness against yourself. So that's the Fifth Amendment. The Sixth Amendment says you have a right to a speedy and public trial, a right to an impartial jury, a right to the location of your trial, and assistance of counsel, or a right to a lawyer. So a speedy and public trial just guarantees that you won't sit and rot in the county jail waiting for your court case to happen, right? That they have to like get a move on it and figure out, okay, are you guilty or not guilty? Let's have the trial and let them move on with their lives. Back in the olden days, before this right was spelled out, people could sit in the county jail for like years, just waiting for their court case to finally happen. And so this protects us from that, right? The impartial jury means that it gets to be a jury of your peers. It gets to be people who will not have a bias against you. Now, as you might think about our history in this country, there were plenty of times when, say, freed slaves had to go up to court against their jury of white people. And you can imagine how that maybe worked out for those freed slaves in the past. So there have definitely been some times where the jury was not impartial, that the jury sent people to jail who should not have been sent to jail. But we have that amendment there, and we're continuing to try to do better. Remember, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. We never have been perfect, but we're always working on it, right? And so the Sixth Amendment has been one of those things that we've been working on throughout our history, making sure that juries actually are impartial and not biased, right? The Fifth Amendment is why my father-in-law has, or sorry, the Sixth Amendment is why my father-in-law has a job, right? People have a right to a lawyer, and he is one of those lawyers that represents people who can't afford their own lawyer, right? So he's a public defender. So he's paid for by our tax dollars to represent people who are accused of crimes who can't afford their own lawyer. It's because of the Sixth Amendment that people have that right. You have a right to a lawyer. You have a right to assistance of counsel. You have a right to have someone represent you in court. The Seventh Amendment, this one's funny. It says you have a right to a jury in civil suits above $20. A civil suit is when you sue somebody. That's all it is. When you sue someone for money for some reason. So if the value of that civil suit goes above $20, then you can have a jury decide who gets the money in that civil suit. It's really funny because that $20 amount hasn't changed. Back in 1791, $20 was a significant amount of money. Today, it'd be like, wait, seriously? You need a jury to decide this issue of a $20 matter? Like, for real? The attorney's fees alone would be up in the thousands of dollars. So if you're really going to sue someone for over $20, like, it better be more than just about the money to you, because just hiring a lawyer to represent you is going to cost more than the $20 that you might get if you win the case. So, yeah, but the Seventh Amendment is still there, and that dollar amount has remained unchanged. The Eighth Amendment gives you no excessive bail, and bail is a dollar amount that they set when they first put you in jail while you are waiting for your court case. So the way it works is if you're accused of a crime and you're arrested, then you go to jail and you wait in jail until your hearing, until your court case, until your trial, right? Bail can be set to release you to go home so you can wait for your trial at home. And bail could be anywhere from $500 to, $100,000, depending on the crime. And so no excessive bail means that they can't set your bail at a ridiculous cost, right? If I stole a loaf of bread and I go to jail to await my court case, they can't set bail for $1 million over a loaf of bread, right? That's just unreasonable. So the Eighth Amendment protects us from that. It also says no excessive fines. So if I am found guilty of stealing that loaf of bread, they can't fine me $1 million and make me pay that as my punishment, because that's over the top. And it also says no cruel and unusual punishment, meaning they're not going to torture me as a result of my being found guilty, right? Now, who gets to decide how excessive bail might be and how excessive a fine might be, and who gets to decide what cruel and unusual punishment is? We do today, right? It's up to us today to decide what that means. They didn't define those things in 1791 because they knew it would change. Right? They knew that our culture would change, our values would change, and that the worth of money would change. And so it's up to us today to decide what cruel and unusual is. For example, many people would say that the death penalty is considered cruel and unusual punishment. However, the death penalty is still legal in many states, right? Many states are still using that. And so it's really up to us as a culture and society today to determine, well, what does cruel and unusual punishment mean, and what can and can't we do? Because those things might change over time, right? So there is your due process amendments, amendments 4 through 8. These are all the rights of the accused. And again, I hope you never have to use them, because if you do ever need your 5th or 6th or 7th or 8th Amendment, it means you're on trial. It means you've been accused of a crime and you're going through this. And I hope that never happens to you. But if it does, I'm glad you have these rights, because you are innocent until you're proven guilty, right? And then our last amendments, the 9th Amendment says the rights are retained by the people. Basically, what that means is that we have other rights too. We have more than just the rights that are in the Bill of Rights. We have additional rights beyond that. They just didn't list them all. If you remember a few videos back, James Madison promised that by listing our rights, it wouldn't limit our rights. So the 9th Amendment basically says, and we have other rights too. We have more rights than the ones we just listed in the Bill of Rights. And then finally, the 10th Amendment says that powers are reserved to the states and the people. Basically, this means that it's up to the states and the people living in those states to create their own laws for themselves. And anything that isn't decided by the national government, every state and the people living in those states get to decide their own laws for themselves. Okay, so the 10th Amendment isn't so much about individual rights, it's more about the rights of states and the people living in those states to get to determine their own laws and their own path, right? So there you go. Each state gets to make its own laws. That's basically what the 10th Amendment says. And we did it. We got through the 10 amendments to the Bill of Rights. So we explained due process, the 4th through 8th Amendment, the rights of the accused, and a little bit about 9 and 10 too. All right, good job, everybody. You are now done with the Bill of Rights instructional videos. Whew.